Hello, and good day to you wherever you may be. Hello, hello, hello. Joining us from all over the world. We appreciate you for taking the time to be part of this, the start of a new series on art management in Africa. My name is Tawa Folabi, and I have the privilege to curate, to conceptualize, and to host these 7 series on art management in Africa. I'd like to say that I'm dialing in from the territories of the Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of Mischief Nations, in on 34, in a city called Regina, Saskatchewan, in Canada. I also have to pay respect to my homeland, Nigeria, where I come from. And a lot of the things we're going to be talking about in this series speaks about my motherland, speaks about the continent, but also speaks about the interconnectedness between the continent of Africa and other spaces. I am the director of the Center for Social Engaged Theater at the University of Regina, where, of course, the indigenous nations that I just mentioned, their land where the university sits on. I want to first of all start by saying special thank you to all our partners and collaborators. Thank you for HowlRound Theatre Commons for always believing in my ideas and coming back to just partner with them. And I really appreciate the partnership. Special thanks to Theatre Ministry International and its social enterprise, Mobile Research Lab. Thank you to the Pan-African Creative Exchange, PACE. Thank you to La Cité at the University of Regina for the translation and the French translation and the interpretation. And of course, thank you to the Center for Socially Engaged Theater, and thank you to Kiniso Creatives. Today, we are going to be speaking to two amazing, lovely, remarkable art leaders and managers on the continent. We're going to be speaking to Faisal Kiwewa from Bayimba Foundation, and Faisal is going to speak more to what they do at the foundation from Uganda, and we're going to be talking to Patrick Sam from Namibia. Um, I am co-hosting this with Natasha Eck, and I'm hoping that Natasha is going to join us in other series because they're unable to join us today for some couple of it because of an emergency. To set the stage, which is the title of this first episode, I'd like to give some context to the entire episode, the entire series, and then to help us and then shape this particular episode. Also, I want to thank Chrissy, who is our captioner, and Thea, our tech guru at HowlRound. I also want to especially apologize. We did mention that we're going to have ASL interpretation for this series, but we won't be able to have that just for ethical reasons, because we know that this series is situated and we're drawing folks from all over the world, particularly from the continent of Africa. Just for ethical reasons, we feel like it might be inappropriate for us to dominate and impress ASL over this. So our sincere apologies for that. So when I was thinking about this series, art management in Africa, some couple of things that spark up this idea. I started my theater company, Theater Ministry International, in 2011 and registered in 2012 in Nigeria. And my education in theater never really prepared me for what it means to really run an organization. It never really prepared me on management, on administration, until I dived in. It was, a one-man company until then it became 3, and then it grew to us working in over a dozen countries across 4 continents. I started asking myself, what are the competencies that we need to build to develop as art administrators and managers to be able to tell our stories? Because I realized that in many conferences and festivals that I went to across on the continent and beyond, I realized that there were people that really that's their job to think about the HR, to think about the visas, to think about the intellectual property, to think about fundraising, so many things. And I was asking myself, what do we have that? I was asking myself, are we prepared for this? And this really speaks to broader questions around our creative economy and the creative sector. For as many years down the line, doing research and all of that, I realized that when it comes to art management and administration on the continent of Africa, we do not necessarily, what we have in terms of education, pedagogy, is not necessarily on the same wavelength as we have it in the West, particularly in North America and Europe. The second thing also to consider is that in terms of existing literature that really focuses on art management and administration, cultural policy on the continent, many times it's actually theorists and scholars that are really speaking about these things, not necessarily having practitioner speaking so much about it. So the little that we have that focuses on the continent, many times, and again, I acknowledge the work that has been done, but the little that we have, we don't necessarily have practitioners really speaking to these ideas as it concerns the continent and our own nuances and complexities. So when I was putting this series together, some of the key questions that I was asking myself were, one, what does art management look like? What has it looked like in the past? And what does it look like now? And what is future on the continent? What are the competencies that we have developed over the years, whether due to our socio-political, historical realities that we don't necessarily talk about? In fact, I want to acknowledge the work of so many artists and art administrators, policymakers, cultural experts on the continent and of course in the diaspora who have heavily invested in the creative sector on the continent. But how can we bring all of that together to be able to strengthen, amplify, and really tell our story in a sustainable way and how we want to tell our stories? So over the next 7 episodes, we're going to be asking ourselves all of these questions and more. Particularly for today, we're going to be really speaking to setting the stage for the entire series. We're going to be asking ourselves questions that has to do with the practice and the stories of our guest speakers today. I'm hoping that out of this series, there will be that cross-cultural, inter-country conversation, because we need that. Morocco, Tunisia need to speak to South Africa. Namibia needs to speak to Nigeria. Ghana needs to speak to Uganda, because festivals, alliances, networks, so many things are happening all over the continent that are also in the diaspora. So the 14 dynamic art leaders that we have on this episode are really coming to share their stories, to share their journey, and to offer us some thoughts that I'm hoping that emerging artist or art administrator who may necessarily didn't go to school to learn the art or the art, to learn it within the 4 walls of the university or college, can actually believe in what they are doing, that it's valid. Because a lot of the times, we think validity has to come from the 4 walls. We forget many times that our own way of engaging and knowing on the continent is really by doing, by the internship, by the mentorship, by the apprenticing, and all of those things. That's the first thing. We want to share those stories. 2, is that I'm hoping that there can be that dialogue among practitioners to add to the existing conversations that some practitioners, some cultural experts, and some scholars have been offering us. That we can actually speak that story by ourselves rather than somebody writing for us or on behalf of us. And then finally, I hope that we can continue to make those connections. And Patrick and I met many years ago, and we've been staying in touch. I've met with Fraser. I think that these are opportunities to be able to connect and know what are the things that are happening. Exchange tips, talk about different possibilities, and even collaborate and partner together. So without further ado, I'd like to bring into this conversation Faisal Kiwewa from Bayimba Foundation and Patrick Sam from Namibia. So the first question I'd like to ask them is really just for them to introduce themselves. Intentionally, I didn't introduce them because they wear so many hats. As you would see, that's the life of an artist, of an art administrator and manager on the continent and across the world. So I want to start with Fraser. Do you want to introduce yourself and position yourself? And after that, we pass it to Patrick. And after that, I'll get on to asking my first question. So over to you, Fraser. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Taiwo, and thank you so much for the opportunity, and great to meet you, Patrick, as well. It's a great opportunity to join in on the arts management on African Focus series, and kind of privileged to be championing this new series for the first episode. My name is Faisal Kiwewa. I am from Uganda. I was born and raised in the country. And I work with the Bayimba Foundation, which is an organization I started in 2006. And since then, I've been, working alongside a team of other enthusiastic staff and, partners and strategists and well-wishers, but also a community of people that have really supported the organization to achieve what it has done so far today. We've been in the business for all this time, and we are grateful for the work that we've done and the partnerships that we've had, but also the vision that we are holding on to that we hope to achieve in the long term. So yeah, thank you so much, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Faisal. Patrick?
Yes, everybody. Thank you very much, Teo, also for the platform. I think it takes this level of initiative to, I think, put an action that changes the narrative. So I think this work speaks to what needs to be done and how do we need to respond to the existing gaps. But my name is Patrick Sam. I am from Namibia. Unlike many people, I am older than my country. I watched the apartheid regime end in Namibia. I, have this euphoric sense of life can change fundamentally, because when you watch a regime like apartheid that is based on embedding ideas of segregation and dehumanization, it becomes very important that failure in terms of humanity and dignity ends up being my fuel. All right, so end up growing up in the hood in the location here, and my mom was like a secretary, and she just typed my name in like resegregate. What is it? It's desegregation and resegregate, or is it reintegration? Integration, assimilation. Right. So my name gets typed on. I go to one of the best public schools in the country, but I'm still living in the hood. So Namibia is, I think, one of the top 3 most unequal societies in the world, which means the gap between rich and poor, particularly my people from my mom and dad's side were genocided by, the German Reich in 1904, 1988, the first genocide of the 20th century, and kind of the long implications of what this means for one's spirit, what it means for one's access and opportunity. And I think in trying to tell stories, we, and Namibia being a new country, cultivated a platform called Spoken Word Namibia. And for 15 years, every Wednesday, we ran a show. It was an informal, voluntary-based organization, but for 15 years, we had a show every Wednesday. And I always say that, the capital of Namibia, Windhoek, it's the only place in the world where the poets are cool. Like if you go look at the traces, it's the singers were poets, the writers were first poets, the rappers were first poets, right? So where poetry in itself seems on the periphery in many places, we, through the spoken word movement, were able to have a place where people can come together and articulate their expression. I think there's freedom in your ability to articulate expression. And then obviously through that, the comedy movement got started, right? So we had Free Your Mind, and then they followed the same model. So instead of every first Wednesday, they went every first Thursday, all right? And then of the month, and then from there, another movement started called Song Night, which starts it's the last Wednesday of the month. So the week before, so and they kind of follow the spoken word model for many years. And so that was the birthplace of like wanting a place where there's expression. And then the comedians thinking that it's a joke when they saw an ad in the newspaper to say, can you apply to the Art Council towards shaping what public investment is within the art sector? And so then I ended up applying. I ended up being the chairperson for 7 years. I get elected onto the International Federation to chair the African chapter. So about 13 countries. Through this, we're able to really shape the cultural agenda at a global level in ensuring that public cultural institutions end up being public facing rather than member facing, and what the implications of that are in terms of the amplification of not just culture, but cultural diversity. I think because, there can be like cultural supremacy. And I think we sometimes use the word loose-endedly. We don't realize it's like the ocean, it can drown us or it can quench us. So I think it's important to understand the duality in terms of the natural elements. So yeah, I'm that guy from the hood. I had the opportunity to live in America, in Europe. I studied international and transcultural studies, but essentially I'm a practitioner, I'm a storyteller that then became a policymaker because I knew that the seed needs soil. And Taya, I hope we talk about that understanding of the difference between you, the seed, the talent, the recognition for that, and the soil that it requires, and whose role and responsibility is to ensure that the soil and the seed end up being fruitful so that we can eat the fruits and be wholehearted and be cultured and all of those nice things that are the effects of ensuring that the industry is at the forefront.
But thanks, Patrick. Full of a lot of imageries, metaphors. I mean, you're a poet, right? Thanks for setting us on the move here, because you sort of give us a historical, socio-political, cultural connection to the motherland. Each country is different, but we have different alignment. Nigeria has its own history of colonization, and of course, 1960 we had our independence. Are we still really independent? That's always a question on the continent. Of course, Uganda, you have your own, and the civil war and all of that. And it seems that as art managers and administrators, we're actually formed and raised in the woods. It seems that we didn't really, it was not within four walls. And I'm speaking for myself now. I'd like to go back to Fraser. What's your journey? Understanding your own political, cultural, and all of those things, and how rich, robust that the cultural sector in your country is. What's your journey into art management and administration? How did you come about it? How did you even set up Bayimba Foundation, and what is and how it evolved from 2006? If you just want to give us an access, a little bit opening into your journey, Fraser. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I come from a very humble background. I wouldn't say just like Patrick. I was born in the center of Kampala, in the city center. So I saw everything evolving. I was born in '83. So we're in the middle of the civil war that brought this current government. And my parents were really, trying to mitigate how to survive, because we were really in the capital, like in the center of the city. And that's where it wasn't really very much affected. As you know, capital cities always come last when the wars are coming to an end, and then they take over power in the capital, they swear in. So I didn't know very much about what was happening, but I grew through that. And luckily my parents were philanthropists in a way, that we had this model in our societies then, where communities in towns and cities had theater clubs or music clubs and women groups, and that used to do drama and theater for Christmas Day, New Year's, and we are not independent, I think. But so my parents were supporting one of the community group that was in our community, in our village. And at the age of 6, so they asked me, we are funding this group. Why don't you join in instead of being home and just do some drama? So that's where I started. And I started dancing and acting and, singing. And then when I continued that in primary school, we had a very good school model whereby primary school used to have really this very nice school competition, traditional. I think it's all over Africa, most traditional groups, inter-school competitions and stuff like that. So we could go to school and play all kinds of instruments, dance and sing. And that was kind of my initiation, I would say. Like I got so excited about this and I went through with it all my primary school. And then in secondary, I think as I grew older, I got tired of it. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I went into doing sciences. I thought I would do like maybe art and religious studies and whatever geography, which I'm so bad at these days. But then I just went into science because I didn't want to do anything with art. But when I finished school, I was like, I think it's not, the society wasn't good. I went back to art. So I studied film production. I studied music again. And then I realized as a practitioner, because I was performing, I was singing, I had recorded my albums, I was acting, I was making films, I was working for the television and the Uganda television. But in my practice as an individual, I wasn't really satisfied with what I was presenting to the public. I felt like it was premature. I felt like it wasn't good enough, not because I didn't feel confident with myself, but I felt like the environment that I was operating in and the environment that I was presenting my work in wasn't good enough to give my best to an audience to appreciate it. But at the same time, I also felt like the audience that was receiving my work wasn't also prepared for the kind of readiness that I was looking for them to appreciate. So these were the two things that were really driving my confusion, and I was in this. And then on the Christmas Day, I had my last concert, the Christmas Day of 2005. That was my last concert, and I told my manager, I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. And he was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. It's not good. I don't feel happy when I'm on stage. I don't think I don't feel like I'm giving whatever I could. So I went into, a process of rethinking and saying, what am I going to do? I wanted to look for a job. And I never wanted to work for anyone. That was something I promised myself since I was a kid. I'll never ask for a job. So I wanted to do something that was able to kind of fit into or close that gap that I was feeling. And I felt like if I wasn't satisfied and happy with how I'm delivering my work to a wider audience and to myself, then there must be many more others who are feeling the same. I didn't know who they are. I hadn't talked to anyone, but I thought that there was that, need for people to be happy with how they present their artistic work to an audience. And that's how the foundation of Bayimba started. It really came in to create that gap or to cover that gap of working towards a vibrant art sector that is really going to be professional, viable, sustainable, and contributing to not just the happiness, but also the livelihoods, because we are in a very difficult economy and it has changed a little bit, but not that much. I thought that, having professional artists, which I think it's true, gives people a much more easier way of improving on their livelihoods and also bringing art to a better place in society. So that's where it comes from. And I started, it wasn't easy, but it has really stick to that vision of really working towards building capacities, working towards creating platforms. We've created so many platforms. We started with one festival, and that whole process is a whole different book that one can write about. But starting with one festival was also a realization that if we are going to run a festival that runs for a week, it's not going to be easy when there is no content. So we immediately started investing in content. And I didn't know anything about arts management, to be honest. I had never heard of the word arts management. And I didn't even know what I was doing, actually, because I didn't study it anywhere. I didn't know about it. I was just an artist who was, passionate, enthusiastic, and kind of crazy enough to just say, I'm going to start a foundation and organize a festival. So I'd never organized a festival. I'd never attended one. I just said, I'm going to do it. And that's how it started. Luckily, I worked with a few people, but the realization of the needs, even just during the process of organizing the festival, gave me a very good starting point, because I said, okay, if I have 4 bands, which I had by the time, and I'm running a 5-day festival, it's not going to work. You can't have 3 bands or 4 bands running a 5-day festival. So we need to start investing in content. And we're planning, we're doing a multidisciplinary festival, bringing music, dance, theater, film, photography, fashion, hip hop, and all these other things, contemporary dance. So it was impossible to find this content in Uganda. So we had to look outside Uganda. We had to find people who know what they are doing. We had to find people who can represent the idea of a multidisciplinary festival, bring them to the festival so that the local artists who didn't know or did understand what we are doing can see what we are trying to create, and then they can start. It will be easier for us to explain to them, this is what we are looking for. This is what we want you to present. Can you do this? Can we work around this? And that really helped us to explain physically to the artists, but also to get them to understand that they need training, they need to learn, they need to be, cultivated to like whatever genre that they like. And it continued like that. So we have really invested in arts education, I would call it, as a whole in Uganda for the past 19 years. And we've invested over $2.5 million in training artists, in Uganda. And we have invested in stakeholders like arts managers, arts professionals, people working in arts offices and stuff like that for the past 19 years as well. We have invested in every discipline of art in Uganda, from dance to music to theater to photography to visual arts to new media, graphics, and video mapping, say it all, street theater. We've done it. And the idea was to open up the horizon for artists, open up the space for artists to see that it's not just music as an art form. It's not just visual arts or theater. There are so many other art forms. And we have been lucky that so many people have embraced it. The region has been part of our growth, and the continent has been part of our growth. And our network has expanded to really offer Uganda as one of the creative hubs in the region. And I think that's one of the work that we've been doing over the years.
Thanks, Faisal, for giving us like a snapshot of your history and how and that journey to. And I'm hearing a lot of course, when you started, you just went for it, and it sounds to many art administrators and managers that I've spoken to, it's like, I just did it, I just started it, it's like I don't even know what I'm doing, I just did it, and then and then along the line, I learned so many things and different things like that. I'm also hearing the piece around investing in not just only in content creation, but in stakeholders and all of that. I'm going to come back to the competencies that you've developed over those journeys of more than 2 decades. But I want to come to Patrick to really tell us what your journey is. And for our viewers, if you have questions, please feel free to put it there. We'll be happy to get questions if should you have any. We're watching the live stream so that if there's any question, we can get that and hear back from you. Patrick, you were talking about the seed, the soil, the all of those beautiful metaphors that you and I we've had the opportunity to talk about in Stockholm, in South Africa, and had the opportunity to envision and imagine different possibilities. Tell us your journey. How did your own seed, what soil did it get into? How did they come together? Where tell us your journey into art management and administration over the years. Over to you, Patrick.
Well, thank you, Tayo, for the question. I think, given the context, and this is kind of when you're asking, I think a lot of the challenge with a Western lens is having to tell the story like as if you don't come from like a culture that nurtured you to become like this.
Exactly.
When you hear the story, when you're talking about the parents and the collective imagination, essentially, all right, that led him as a custodian of that collective imagination. So I think the first disposition here would be like, what is the collective imagination? right, within the African context when it comes to arts management? And I think that's a very important question, because when you're looking at what the collective imagination is, you'll realize that my work is not to do with arts management. My work is not to do with education. It's not to do with health. My work is embedded in dignity for all. It is whatever tool I need to use, whether it is the education tool, whether it is the arts, creative, storytelling vehicles. And my question is, and the argument I'll make is to deal with the continued perpetual dehumanization on the African continent. I will make the argument that arts, culture, and heritage are almost an antidote towards that dehumanization, right? So the question not just is like, is the African narrative, are Africans, are the African people, are the countries, are the leaders, are they human? Because the issue of dignity is directly attached to the idea of being human, right? And so I think it's important when it comes to storytelling, identity, nation building, collective imaginations, all of this, that it's embedded in the issue of dignity. And then I'll make the argument and say, I believe for Africans to bridge that deficit of dignity that a lot of people have felt on the country for various reasons, because we get assimilated into a political agenda that is not from here, right? So even if the fact that, like in the Southern African context, we don't ever call it art management, we call it art, culture, and heritage management. Because the truth is, in Canada, in America, that's also being done. But then you tell everybody else it's just art. But then there's issues around your statues being removed or not, and whatever a value system that they represent, right? It is culture for you to go to museums with stolen artifacts, right? Like it's just the way that you go about things. It is artistic to imitate contemporary expressions that are not authentically embedded within a collective consciousness, right? So to sum all of this up, I think for me, the issue and the story is around, I've always been human centered, and I've always cared about the issue of dignity on the African continent. And as a result of that, I've prioritized the arts, culture, and heritage, because they end up being the food for your soul, right? And so when you're talking about not just humans, you're talking about human beings that beyond that 900 and 200 and whatever bones and cells and your humanness, there's a being that needs to be nurtured. Now, in how we spend our lives and how we get nurtured, fundamentally, if we have human dignity, we will not be devoid of the arts. We will not be devoid of culture. We will not be devoid of our heritage. So, to answer the question of what is the status of arts management, it'll be the exact replica of the status of dignity in each country. The more art is visible, the more culture is available, the more dignity the people have in that country. So that for me, it is art is just almost like a screen, like a smoke screen to really identify issues around dignity, and saying that all people who are dignified have access to expressions. They have access to various types of expressions. They're able to come together in community. They are resourced well. Their projects are enabled at a legislation level, at a policy level, at an institutional level, right? So my difficulty is dissociating the issue of the status of art management from the issue of the status of dignity for Africans.
Interesting. And rightly said, Patrick. I do, yes, the art mirrors, the society. It refracts, it reflects. Your own journey. What's your journey to art administration and management? How did you start it? I'd love to hear your story, Patrick. Like,
No, let's humanize it. So because I was saying that it's not so much like, so my preface is that the story of art management is really directly associated to dignity management, because the vehicle that you use to get to dignity is art, right? So I always in my journey was looking at human-centered approaches. I come from a country that's the second unequal country. I've lived this experience. I have family members that don't have opportunities and access to places that I do as a result of going and attaining a better education system in a different place, that comes with a network, that comes with a resource network, that comes with opportunities, that comes with mobility, all of that. So I started as an after-school program, right? So my thing was, I came from the hood. One thing I had was education saved me, and it was kind of weird. This grade 10 exam that, like, at my school, we don't, like, you can be half drunk writing these exams, you'll still pass. But on the opposite side in the hood, it's like you almost get like a PhD for passing these grade 10 exams. So I was like, what? this thing that was so easy for us to pass uptown, why is it so difficult here? And why does it end up being a gatekeeper for so many young people in this particular area? Right. So my journey starts in education, after school programming. It starts with sports development. And so I think because a lot more money was invested into those things structurally and systemically in the early phases of Namibia's development, people are more likely to give money to sports. They're more likely to give money to education. So that's where I learned a lot of the management skills, right? Like how do you do program design? How do you monitor and evaluate? How do you implement? How do you do things cost effectively? How do you process optimize? How do you leverage on relationships? How do you fundraise? So really the ecosystem. And this is getting back to the point, what you're asking the seed and the soil is, I think, in order to develop an ecosystem that works for the creatives, we might have to skill borrow, competency borrow, if we have a very linear way of looking at it. Because if we are brought together by the idea of dignity and saying, yeah, we need education and health and whatever, we will move more flexibly. But because we come with this like career hierarchy of I'm only in the arts, but it's like, what is the effect of your arts? Who is it supposed to affect? Right. And I'll tell you, serving on the International Federation, there was a huge clash around this. And I'll tell you how my presence there changed a lot of the perspectives in terms of art is not just for the artwork. It also is about the decency of the artist and the status of the artist. Right. And so in that, what does that mean for the world? Like the world always focused on the works that were produced, but they were never focusing equally on the artist and the status of the artist in terms of that. So my personal story is really one that is involved from education, from health, from sports into the creative sector. And I promise you, by the time the first in Malta at the World Summit of Arts and Culture, I was like, everybody was saying, "Oh, the state must do this," and we were like, "What? Where are you guys in the 70s?" Right? So I already identified early a lack of agency within the cultural sector that might be tied to many issues, right? But I think fundamentally the gaps that exist is because there's a leadership gap in order to govern systemically through institutions, policies, and I'm not talking about formal things. I'm even talking at a community level. What Faisal was doing, we need a Faisal at a community level, but also who's enabled, whose family understands the value system, right? Who just doesn't think that this is of no value, right? There's already an implicit value system. So I think for me, my personal story is I literally leveraged off the skills that I developed in other sectors when I moved into the creative sector. And I think sometimes we need to kind of do those crossovers or identify people that might not be practitioners. I mean, I happen to be a practitioner, but formally in the context, I was a public policy specialist. I was an international development expert. I was a creative consultant. So the challenge is that art administrators just limit themselves with the need of having to come from a cultural background or an artistic background, where I think if we open up and have a broad-based approach to say, where does the competency lie? Is it only within the sector, or does it other sectors like education, like health, because they're all human-centered? Can we build bridges with those sectors and get the skills that they might know and inculcate them into the way we do things?
Thank you, Patrick. I think both of you, you've met, you've said so many things. I'm not going to try to editorialize or reduce it. But something that come across the both of you have said is this idea of broad-based thinking. So, Fraser, you talked about the connection to your family, to philanthropy, and perhaps that significantly impacted your outlook. Okay. Patrick, you also mentioned your leveraging different sectors, equal or other sectors, other disciplines, and bringing competencies, whether it's from human resources, marketing, policy, and all of that. And you then brought all of that into what you're doing within the creative sector. This kind of leads me to the second question, or our next question rather. I think I've asked you more than one question by now, hopefully. I want to come to Fraser. In the past over 2 decades that you've been doing this, what are the competences that you have developed? And, I started by saying that at our preliminary talk, one of the things I mentioned is that your stories are important. And how you got there is also important, especially for many emerging or even established artists who are interested or they are doing this already, but they don't have a name for it. And it's like, Do I, am I doing this right? I remember when I started theater industry many years ago, it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I believe in what I'm doing. Okay. you know, I was doing everything I was doing in Ife. Ife is this like 4 hour city from Lagos. Like I was not, Lagos is the center. Like Fraser, it sounds like you were in the center in Kampala. For me, I was not at the center. I was literally in a city that was far away. But you know what? Even though I may not necessarily know what I was doing. Like, I'm just going to do it. I believed in what I'm doing. And I think that that's the power of the stories that you're sharing. Somebody somewhere there in Ife or in that local place in Uganda is doing what you're doing, but they don't necessarily hear stories of people that have done something similar and how they started. And that's why that story is important. Our stories are critical. What competencies have you built over the years, whether you had them before, whether you built them along the way, that has helped you in what you're doing?
Um,
So,
yeah, thank you. I think I wouldn't. I mean, I'm still learning.
of
I'm
course,
still learning, and I get bored very easily. So I find myself creating new things all the time,
of
just
course,
to keep me busy, and then I keep on adding on to also challenging my colleagues, because one of the things I've learned over time is that in our line of business, especially if you're an arts manager who has an operating office with a scheduled calendar of events and activities, your staff get bored very easily, and you actually have to keep them excited by something coming up, something new. So I always try to create new initiatives that are going to be, in 2 3 years time, that I keep my staff excited about. And then whereas they are doing their day-to-day, operations that continue on a regular basis, they are also looking forward to something just to keep them excited, motivated, that they will be facing a new challenge along the way. But I have to say, when I started, as I said, I didn't know anything, and I never attended a festival. And when I organized my first festival, and I will say this, and I've said it many times, that I organized this festival for the first time. First of all, I didn't have money, and I looked around. It took me a year to raise money, but I didn't find it. And lastly, I was really, fundamentally supported by my family, and and on a loan basis. I took a loan from the family that I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, and I had anticipated I'm going to make money. We had never had a festival, and I was looking at it. I was like, it's going to work. It's going to have, I'm going to get this money back. So I borrowed like 60,000 euros, and I had 60 people coming to the festival for the 3 days that I organized, the big, the actual event. So literally, I spent 1,000 euro on every person that came to the festival, and I didn't get any single penny back. And that was one of my lessons. Like I couldn't. I mean, I was happy. And at the end of it, but at the same time, I was like, I think it didn't sink in up like a month after. I was like, oh my God, I have a loan to pay. And this was one first lesson. But also the other thing I learned about that is that I think I gone at it in a wrong way. The idea was great, the approach, the concept was good, but it wasn't thought through. And this is one of the things that I learned. And I was also dealing with so many people. I was young. One of the reasons why I didn't get sponsorship in my first festival was one of the reasons, but this is the main one. I think they couldn't trust me with the money, because they were like, I'm too young. Like, why are you asking for 500 million Uganda shillings? How old are you? Like 20, 22? Are you serious? Even have you ever had this kind of money? So I could not actually articulate my budget. I could not articulate my vision. I needed to learn. I needed to learn how to speak. I needed to learn how to convince people, to get people on board, to make them understand. And then when I finished, I also realized that I had a team of colleagues that I was working with. Some of them had PhDs, others had, masters, others had, graduates in accounts, finance, marketing, and they all came to me for guidance. You're the founder, you're the artistic director. How do we do this? How do you deal with these PhD people when you don't know even what you're doing? So I had to get myself to learn. And this is one of the things when it comes to what we need to do is, I think as Patrick said, that we need to invest in ourselves as arts managers. When we identify, I would say, our calling, because it's not for everyone, to be honest. I mean, I don't think arts management is for everyone. It's like being an artist, a practicing artist. It's not for everyone. So if you identify your calling, then you have to understand that you need to learn the process and how you're going to go about it. So for me, my first thing was to look out for where do I learn to do my job better. So I first signed up. My first course was in culture economics, and I studied culture economics. And I think for me, that really gave me the foundation of what it means to conceptualize. And even, people come up with concepts like innovation or creativity or, invention or, being a product design. How do you design your festival? Like a cup or a phone or, a television or whatever. How do you design it to stand out? Understanding the context in which you're operating, understanding the environment that you're going to operating in, understanding the challenges of politics and society and norms and cliches and all that stuff. So culture economics really guided me through that with my trainers and teachers. They really helped me to understand and ask me really questions like I took for granted, like, Faisal, why are you doing what you're doing? I'm like, because I did it. I'm like, no, that's not the question. Why? Are you ready? Do you have the time? Do you have the commitment? Do you have the do you have the responsibility to take on the failure that comes along? So I went ahead to study failure as a subject. What does it mean to fail? Because we fail every day, and in that learning failure, for me it's like therapy, to be honest, because we are challenged every day in our role of work, in our line of arts management. And if you don't know that you through failing is when you succeed, then you can't do it. You can't do what we are doing because we are challenged every day. It's not a piece of cake. So then I mean, another competence that I really went to do, I studied arts management. As I said it, I was looking out, and I was lucky to be admitted at the DeVos Institute of Arts Management at the Kennedy Center in Washington. And through that program, I spent time every summer for 3 years. I went to Washington, and I spent my 2 months with the best in the business, with Michael Kaiser, the president of the Kennedy Center, with David Kito, who was the head of marketing, with Brad Egan, who is a strategist for the Alvin Ailey and all these big, arts organizations in New York and everywhere. So I was really in the circles of and really hand in hand. I spent time with David Rubenstein, who was the chairman of Coca-Cola, and we could see what does it mean to support the arts? What does it mean to run an institution like the Kennedy Center, an opera or concert, a symphony orchestra, all these things, and what productions are there. It also gave me an understanding that we really need to do a lot of work back home, learning from those experiences. And I was really, inspired to come back home and start looking at my team, but also understanding that, they can't change overnight, but work with them in a way that they are gradually growing into the people or the team that I'm building, that I want to work with, and envisioning a bigger thing. So this is where I really find myself, growing. And I started my journey, educating myself, investing in myself. It wasn't any funding or it was personal money that I put in. And like, I need to learn, I need to know, and I need to be able to sustain this journey that I'm never gonna get out of.
Thanks, Fraser. Thank you. And we're gonna, you've talked about, competencies such as marketing, understanding your vision, and all of those things. Patrick, I want to come to you. what are the competencies that you've built, that you've developed, whether it's on the job, whether in the school you went to? I'd just love to hear your own thoughts about your competencies or the competencies that you've developed over the years as an art administrator manager.
I think, the framework that you provide is really interesting in terms of what are some of the experiences, exposures, practices
Mm-hmm.
that kind of constitutes this. And I think a lot of where I want to kind of position the work and the kind of competencies is centered around the idea that arts, culture, and heritage are a national resource, right? And at an individual level, that a seed is talent. Now, if you're in an ecosystem where people don't recognize that seed is talent, then they will not necessarily enable the seed to make it fruitful, right? So a lot of the competencies lie for me in understanding how the state is structured and putting an obligation on the state to humanize its own people, and then saying that the way that they do that is through prioritizing arts, culture, and heritage, or the cultural and creative industries, or cultural expressions, or arts and culture, whatever that the word or the vehicle that you use is. So I think the competencies is about fundamentally understanding that what we're doing is a public good, right? And I think a part of that narrative in terms of we always assume it's a private good. And so a lot of my competencies lie in being persuasive and convincing to governments to prioritize this. I mean, it's taken us 10 years, but we're on the National Development Plan as a thematic area. So I think the culture in a democratic state, particularly in the African context, where policymakers, political leadership only focus on this like extractive mindset of Africans, right? Which is the diamonds are important to us, our gold is important to us, our oil is important to us, but never that our people are important to us, right? So within our sector, we're dealing with people, we're dealing with talent, and we're saying ultimately this talent is a resource for the country. And not only that, that it also has like the least barriers of entry, right? So if we're looking at the African context in having a young population and ensuring that that becomes a dividend, and not a liability for us in where we are moving, it is important to understand how we need to leverage state institutions and ensure that they acknowledge that the sector is a public good and then avail adequate resources, right? So a lot of my competencies lie there. And I think it's a challenge because a lot of art, like you said, practitioners become policymakers and they get stuck within like a microeconomic space. It happens a lot in teaching. So a lot of teachers, they think of the classroom, now have to think about like, what is the financing formula for education? They're like, whoa, I don't know. I just need to know what my lesson plan is, right? So this idea of scaling knowledge at a systemic level, at a macro level, I think it's important. And when we speak about the sector within a macroeconomic context, because macroeconomics is there to ensure the well-being of people, all right? We will then look at issues around ensuring government's budget for infrastructure, ensure there's programs for education, skills development, and training in the sector, both within the formal and informal, non-formal spaces. We will look at issues of financing. So in the art council space where I worked, we would always just look at how do we support like community work, keep the Africans busy, let them keep on dancing and doing whatever, but it was never commercially viable work. So the question of like, are we compromising people's livelihoods, right, by not being give them access to these opportunities that can fundamentally change their livelihood, right, becomes an issue. So I think a lot of the competency has to be both within the micro space. So what Faisal is talking about, how organizations create an ecosystem where they can function. And I think we need art managers and advocates at a macroeconomic level that can look at what is our GDP contribution, what is the formal jobs that we contribute to. And this is kind of the expectations in any other sector. But I think in the African context, because it's human centered, it's got to do with talent, then we almost can't apply the same thinking sequences that we do in other industries, right? Like having baselines, ensuring that there's evidence, ensure that we highlight all of these important kind of factors and interventions. So I think the combination of having agency at a micro level internally intra the organization and understanding the greater ecosystem within which we function, because to be truthful, that's why arts, culture, and heritage functions in the West. The Canadian Federal Council has $1.1 billion to give. The Art Council of England has $980 million to give. Why are they doing that if there's no ROI? Right? And in the African context, it's always like, where else has this been done? Like, there's an inferiority complex that affects decision making. They need to see it. I'm like, no, we're pioneering. They're like, what do you mean? We're the first ones. I'm like, yes, we are the first ones. And this is how we can substantiate why we're the first ones. We've done our research, we've done our evidence. So I really think that action needs to be at all levels, and those levels include the macroeconomic space as well. And I think we need to build the confidence to know that we're valuable and we make a valuable contribution economically, socially, culturally, and consciously. And the cumulative effect of that is internalized confidence for us when we speak to people that control the wallet or the budget at a public level. So I advocate for this being a public good, and for people, communities strengthening their ability to ensure that the state is responsive to their needs.
Patrick, this is really great. And Fraser, both of you kind of talked about the private, the personal, and the systemic, right? At those levels. And I remember in South Africa, Patrick, we were talking about, I was telling you about this idea of the creative and cultural intelligence that needs to come into existence, amplified within the continent, to be able to put research, and different things like that. I want both of you, I want to acknowledge that both of you have had privileges. Okay, I just want to put that on the table because that's really important. But I want both of you to think of that particular organization, Fraser, that would never have the opportunity to go to DeVos Institute of Management. Patrick, I want you to think about in Namibia, that organization, that struggling, well, maybe struggling is not the right word, but that artist or art administrator that is just starting out, or that is in the mid of their career, or they're at the very end and they've not necessarily had all these amazing opportunities that you have had. I want you to come down to that level. Okay. It's still micro. It's still beyond the just an individual person. It's really coming to their level. I'd like you to explore the line of inquiry here. What are the challenges that you think, what are the challenges and the opportunities that your journey or that you think their journey might offer now? Because we can, we have to understand, the going to Colombia, for example, or having the opportunity, Fraser, that you've had with the amazing folks that you've had and the networks and all of that, that puts all of us at a certain pedigree. And Patrick, you know me, I'm always very, I'm factual and really, let's talk about these things, right? let's not, I think that we have to be real if we want to. It's a courageous conversation. Okay. The privileges that all of us, we all have due to the West, due to the connections and the places and family and all of those things. But I'd like you to think of that particular person, organization that are trying to run a viable, sustainable art practice, and that their manager, that they're trying to find out, or they are launching out, what are the challenges and the opportunities? And then maybe at this point, any of I want to say, Fraser, go forward, go first, because it's been that order. But I love to disrupt it also. Fraser, you don't have to if you don't want to. Patrick can go. But I'd like you to really think about that in this very local sense, because the reality is that there are many that would never have this kind of opportunities that all of us have. That's the truth. And there'll be many that will have way more opportunities than us. So I'd like us to come down a little bit and kind of speak to those local context and those realities.
I really speak from the ground. And I don't want you to get me wrong. I don't think I'm privileged. That's why I was like, huh? No, I'm not. And I think, like Patrick says, that we have to build the confidence in ourselves to express what we need as humans first, as a people, and as artists, because artists speaks for volumes. It speaks for societies. It speaks for communities and so many ways. So when I look at, when I say I went to the Kennedy Center, I didn't go to the Kennedy Center that I paid. They paid for me to be there for 3 years. Why did they pay for me? Because I asked. And I think we have also to be very honest. Like, if we are looking at developing the industry, the art sector, Patrick can tell you that even Namibia, as he said, it took them 10 years to get where they are now. to get them on the national development policy, to get them on the thematic as part of the thematic achievement that the country needs. It took them just 10 years. And that means that there has been work done by the people before and the efforts put in all along. And this has been Patrick's effort being part of international conversations. Some conversations cannot be achieved within our own just local communities.
That's right.
That's the same thing with the art. We cannot want to be part of, or we cannot want our work to level with the rest of the world, to be playing at the same ground, yet we are not part of the conversation at the global level. My being at the Kennedy Center gave me an opportunity to introduce me to a whole new network of people, the whole new difference of doing business, the whole new way of approaching my work. And I was very fortunate enough to be there, but also to recommend and take others to be part of this journey. Because when I say it, they will be like, that's Faisal talking. But when you take them, give them the chance also to be part of that, if it's a privilege, I would say, or not, they also realize, wait a minute, it's actually very, very relevant. So for me, I think the way we work, and as Patrick says, we really want to have the artists be feeling comfortable within the environment they work in. They are sustainable, they can have their livelihood secured. And that means that they have to have certain levels of growth in their professionalism. If I can give you an example, like, I have had artists from Namibia, from all over Africa coming to Bayimba. I have had artists from Uganda going to the rest of the world. And you realize that even the best artists you have in your country, you take them at the Kennedy Center, they'll freak out because they don't know how this whole system works. They don't know, they're not used to, working with ear monitor. They're not used to a whole setup there. They're not used to the communication language, the engineering, the production preparations and all that stuff. They need to learn these things. And how do they learn them? By getting the knowledge from out, bringing it there. That's how collaborations and exchanges are very, very useful in our line of work. As I told you from the beginning, when I started operating as a ground person, not knowing what to do and not having enough content for so many of these disciplines that I was introducing, I had to go out and find artists who are like-minded, like Aquanaro, like, I've worked with artists from like Global Toronto. We bring these professionals to Uganda to spend a week or two. Every time we have a festival, we have two or three studios set up for artists who have come from outside. We tell them there's an open studio. If you want to go and record something, collaborate with an artist from Uganda. And that's how our artists have managed to learn discipline, professionalism, skill, and also tap into other sounds that they have never had. We run ethno programs for folk music from all over Europe and Africa. And this is the way we have managed to get our artists and stakeholders learn some of the skills. So this interconnection, exchange, and collaboration, it doesn't matter where it comes from. It cannot be, yes, it's great. East and West and South and North Africa and Central need to work together, but it's not the only thing. Don't forget, we have a problem of geography in Africa. I can't move from Uganda to DRC Congo. I can't move from Uganda in 5 hours to Lagos. It's not possible. But I can move from Uganda to London or to Paris in 5 hours. So there is also that problem. It's easier and cheaper for me to get an artist from Paris or Brussels than getting someone from Lagos or from Cape Town. So we also have to embrace this global idea that we want to play at the same level with the rest of the world. And we have to be part of the conversation. We have to position ourselves as equals. We have to be able to invest in our processes, and we have to be able to invest in our artists and the disciplines that we are representing. So for me, I really think the average arts manager in Uganda or in East Africa, and I think the problems of Uganda when it comes to arts management are too small than what the continent is facing. I think I would speak for the region, the East African region. The way I look at an average underground, I would say, arts manager in East Africa, I think they need to look into how do they position themselves within the region. not to look at themselves in their own community, but or in their own space or country where they're operating. Start with the region. The countries, I mean, we are just, but we don't even have boundaries because we can just move from one country to another. So let's position yourself in the region. What are you contributing to this region? How are you adding value to the artists and the arts practice in that region? What are you doing to make sure that there is an added, value to whatever is there already? I think that's where we need to start from. And that means if you think there is some value that you can add to that and you need some skill, then you go find it and get it. And if you know there's someone who has it, Faisal has it, or Patrick has it, collaborate, bring them on board and make sure that they can support you in making sure that you can achieve a bigger goal. And for me, I always say that in East Africa, I always forward this idea of a shared vision. What is our goal? What is our theory of change? And like Patrick, he has been working on policy. He has been advocating. He has been looking for to make sure that there's a conducive environment. I am working. I don't deal with politics. I mean, I advocate, but I'm not interested in those conversations because it's not my bread. I'm not going to start, rubbing shoulders on cocktails because I don't know how to do it. I know how to help artists, how to support artists, how to create platforms, how to make sure. And I really find myself very happy and contented in that area. And I really focus on that. And when someone comes to me and say, oh, what do you think? Where do you think we need to invest in the art sector? I can tell them offhand because I know where music is, where dance is, where theater is, where contemporary, classical or ballet. I can say we need to put money in fashion or we need to put money in video mapping or new media, whatever, because I know I work with them all. So what I think is that we need to not look back at ourselves and say, oh my God, I live in a small community, I'm an arts manager, I look at the weather, it's not working for me. No, you need to be out there. You need to play with the big dogs. You need to understand where you belong. You have to understand your context and find support, find a network of people that are going to get you to where you want to go.
Thank you, Fraser. I think you're hitting really critical points here that we're really thinking about change of mindset, growth, partnership. And I also want to preface that when I say privilege, it's not in any way to hunt the three of us to say that, yeah, we're privileged people. No, 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 no. No, that's not what I mean. I hope that it didn't come across wrongly. What I was saying is that based on our experiences and all that, how does that translate to those that are in our spaces? And you've really articulated that. Patrick, I want to come to you because I think we need to end this thing in the next 5 minutes. I think we've overshoot time. My apologies. That's on me. So, Patrick, I want your thoughts, and maybe also want to think about as we go through this series. Are there other things you think might be interesting for us to touch on? So, Patrick, in 3 minutes or 2 minutes, rather, you want to just kind of speak to that in terms of my earlier question, and in addition to some of the things that you think you might want us to think about as we walk through this series. Over to you, Patrick, quickly.
Don't worry too much about the time. The introductions of the first series take up a lot of time. I was watching it was about 10, 15 minutes. So, everybody else is going to get more time as they speak throughout the series. So, a little bit of that. But I think the issue of privilege is really important to interrogate for Africans, right? So the way I define privilege is if I look at 10 Africans, how many of us have experienced what I've experienced?
That's right.
Right. And then I'm like, oh, I am privileged, right?
That's
Because like I'm actually part of the 0.1 in terms of exposure, in terms of experience. So I think it's important to be able to see how we are privileged because I think the privilege is an ingredient for the success.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Like so people will not include that as like a secret ingredient, which is required. But I think when you're asked the question of like challenges and opportunities, maybe just to speak a little bit about, I think one is the spiritual acknowledgement that Africans need to re-dignify themselves because that is what they're selling. They're selling who they are. Culture is the way we live or the expression of the way we live. And that, for instance, a lot of the times in the beginning when you, Tayo, and Faisal were saying, I didn't know. I'm like, come on, guys. You didn't know about heritage craft. You might have inherited this through your DNA. And therefore, in your understanding of just knowing, it could have been limited because you're not acknowledging how this has been transcended. I think Faisal did a better job in talking about family where it's positioned. It's not something that is just common to him as an individual, but it's part of the ecosystem. So I think it's important that I was doing a workshop on epigenetics that just speaks about the biological transfer of a lot of the into like trauma or whatever knowledge systems. But also, I think when we speak about Afrogenetics, it's beyond the biology, right? It speaks about how spirituality is a key ingredient in how we choose to culturally diversely express ourselves. And I think it's important to exist within that spiritual realm, because we do it when we dance, we do it when we sing, but we have an estrangement to talk about it because it's almost like the people can see our power, and that power becomes threatening. And then they want to remove that power. Therefore, they removed our Benin bronzes. Therefore, they removed all of these instruments as a signal to remove power from you, because those were the props, the tools, the instruments that were used to tell stories and to dignify you. So that's very important that there's a spiritual undertaking by art managers, particularly when it comes to Africans and being the custodians for humanity, right? Because a lot of the work in the sector is in human interest, it's human centered for the public good. How do you defend humanity? And I think Africans have a responsibility and a role in the fact that we're multicultural, we have diverse cultural expressions. We do the most with the least,
Mm.
right? I always say, and the minister was like, "Oh, I know that people don't have water or housing, but like, I think they'll be better if there's like a song that they're singing as they're waiting for their housing and their water." Do you know what I mean? Even in the absence of those fundamental like human things, it eases the process when we hear music, and we saw this during COVID. So I think there is an intention to keep artists, culture, heritage on the periphery, because fundamentally that's how capitalism wins, because capitalism is embedded in the idea that people and things are not equally important. Things are more important than people. And the creative industries, the focus on talent, challenges these fundamental,
Yeah.
I think, positions. And so for me, I always say, if we want things that we've never had, we have to do things that we've never done. All right. And I think that's exactly what you are doing, Tayo. If you want greater synergy, a greater, relationship between diaspora and the people on the continent, more effective processes optimized to kind of enable people to see whose role and responsibilities when it comes to the soil, because we know for a fact that a good seed that is planted in bad soil doesn't grow, but a bad seed that's planted in good soil grows. And I think the question we need to answer about Africa is the soil of art management. I think there's a lot of talented seeds. We've seen them. Some of them grow in concrete. They're just flourishing. But I think epistemology is important here to say what is the birthplace from which we are working. And I think a lot of that's got to do with our heritage craft, which we can make into policies, into legislation, and like what Faisal is saying, into our own agency. Create your own organizations in our own reality that doesn't wait for governments and response. My point is there's no panacea in terms of one intervention. We need to look at all of these interventions at all the levels. So I always say all actions at all levels at all times. And in conclusion, I think Singapore might have an interesting story for us. When they look at their sector, arts management, they ask themselves three questions. They say, is the work that we do inspiring? Is it inspiring, the work we commission to the country, to the people, to the world? Is it inspiring? I think that's very important because inspiration humanizes people. Two, does the work connect communities? So the verb goes from inspiring to connecting, right? And then the last one is, does it position Singapore globally or nationally? So if in an African context, we ask those three questions, is our work inspiring as Africans? Do we connect as Africans? Do we position Africa regionally and globally? I think we'll create a value chain within the African cultural and creative industries that will propel this issue of dignity for all within the continent.
Patrick, this is great. Thank you so much. This is Fraser. Thank you so much. And I know that Fraser and I were connecting at some point to actually have our strategic session in terms of what can we do more. I think that what both of you have talked about is I'm hearing not just only personal growth, but that growth starts with disrupting the narratives we have been told about ourselves. It involves really disrupting that. It involves really thinking about growing, not just only us collectively. It involves partnership. It involves finding new ways and new forms to get things done. Fraser, you want to say your final thoughts, and then I'll
Yeah.
bring this.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, just reiterate, like, I really like the word privilege, and I really like Patrick's intervention on it. But I also like maybe in the next series, we could maybe also talk about how to cultivate privilege. Because for me, I think, we overlook the idea, like, Patrick and I have traveled, we've been around, I have been around, I don't know how many countries, and I've seen art to its best, I've engaged. But I think it not because it was given, I
Yeah.
invested in it. And that's why it has been, and how do we inspire these young people that don't have water, that don't have, things that they're trying to build a culture of, appreciation and development, that they can also understand the value of cultivating privilege, I think. And also maybe the last thing would be, coming from the ground, one of the biggest challenge that we are having on the continent as a whole is space. And it has really ruined our sustainability as institutions and as cultural practitioners. Space is a very big issue. How do we start investing in spaces? How do we look at investing in systems? It's not just space, but also the systems, and then the skills of the people that are going to be able to operate and run those spaces. So those are the things that I would like to add to your future episodes that you're engaging in. Thank you.
This is great. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Of course, Patrick we're connecting a lot. So, and Fraser, I'm going to be in connection with you. That one thing about me is once you get to know me, I get to rub you into whatever I'm doing. Because I think what both of you have said is really fantastic. And the reality is that I think there is a collective vision. Fraser, you were talking about that shared vision, and I think that there's something here. I want to sincerely thank both of you for taking the time and the amazing work that you're doing across your networks. Thank you for how you're cultivating your privileges to be able to build and raise a new, others. I also want to really acknowledge all of our partners who have, been with us all throughout. Thanks to HowlRound Theatre Commons for always believing in this vision to really share knowledge openly, and thanks to the Center for Social Engaged Theatre. And I want to special shout out to Tara Eldred, who has sort of been the one kind of doing all the emails and all of that. Most of the time, those are invisible, that as administrators, we have to recognize those invisible labors. I also want to thank Theatre Mission International and Mobile Research Lab, that's my theater company, and the kind of work that we're doing across the continent and beyond. We've worked in over 21 countries across 5 continents. I can't believe it. And I'm really humbled to be able to work with them and all others partners. And thanks to PACE, thank you to La Cité. We're going to have the French translation interpretation for episode 3 and 5 as a way to really break those language barriers. And of course, thanks to Kininso Creatives, who were sort of supporters in networking and all of that. So with that, I want to say thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you in our next episode. And then again, thank you to Fraser and Patrick. And then this is Taiwo Folabi signing out. Bye, everyone.